Check, check, check. All right, cool.
Hello.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Alexis, do you want to try sharing your screen just to see if it's working today?
Yeah, I think I got on with Dr. Price last night, and things seem to be okay. Let me see if this works. Can you see my?
I do see your screen.
All right, cool beans.
All right, cool. So you're ready for Wednesday then?
Yep.
All right.
Kind of.
And I assume this afternoon as well.
Yes, maybe.
Good. Well, I guess your readiness at this point has nothing to do with screen accessibility.
Yes, technologically, I'm ready.
Good, good. So those of you who are seniors are scheduled to present this afternoon and or evening. Those of you who are juniors, did they send you a room assignment of what room you're supposed to attend?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're supposed to go with your just advisor, and then
Yeah.
there's an amount of presentations within that classroom.
Yep. You should have gotten back your last literature summary in an email this morning with comments on it. I'm not printing off the specs grading sheet primarily because everybody passed, which I'm glad to see. It's the first literature summary that everybody has passed on the first cut, so that's a good thing. I'm continuing to grind through the other grading that is stacked up on me as you guys have turned things in. But as I get those graded, I'll also be just sending out the electronic versions to you when I'm done with them. So questions anybody has about anything?
Do we have new slides for today?
Yeah, they're actually in Friday's folder.
Ah, okay. I just didn't even look there. Thank you.
I was hoping that we would have gotten to them last week, but we did not.
Got it.
All right, Wednesday, Alexis will be leading discussion on the last literature summary, which is Prol and Aphodal. If you haven't looked at that yet, it's a piece of literature looking at mating systems in poison arrow frogs. And, you know, let me know if you have any questions about that leading up to that. But yeah, it seems to me like it's a relatively straightforward sort of paper, and deals with mating systems, which is what we just finished covering on Friday. Today on tap is sex allocation. So as we think about mating systems, one of the things that influences the mating system that ultimately evolves in a group of organisms is the sex ratio. So under certain conditions, if you have a male bias sex ratio, that might send you more towards one mating system rather than another mating system. Similarly with females bias sex ratios, the more males you have relative to females, the more valuable the opposite sex becomes, and so that would tend towards more male-male competition for access to the relatively uncommon and or rare female gametes. And so while mating systems are expected to evolve in response to shifts in the sex ratio within a population, you might also then expect how offspring get allocated to males and females to also be this object of selection over time. And so that's what this chapter is about, is basically how does sex get determined, how does sex ratio evolve, and is there any flexibility in these systems? So here is the PowerPoint. You guys can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So one way of thinking about methods of sex determination, or thinking about sex allocation, is to think about mechanisms of sex determination. And so there are three major categories. Two of these you've possibly heard about, probably in genetics class, and another one is one that you might not have heard about. So probably the one that you're most familiar with is chromosomal sex determination, because it's what we do, it's what birds do, it's what insects do. Lots of organisms have chromosomal sex determination. In chromosomal sex determination, you have chromosomes that are responsible for determining sex, and so the sex that you are is dependent upon that. Environmental sex determination is sex determination that is it involves the sex being determined by some sort of environmental variable. Oftentimes, this environmental variable is temperature, but it can also be other things like salinity. But it's not determined by which chromosomes you possess of the sex chromosomes. And then there's a small subset of organisms that have the ability to change sexes during their lifespan, and we'll discuss that because that in and of itself is interesting as well. Whenever we get to this particular time in the semester in animal behavior, I want to call attention to this chapter in particular, because while I generally try not to build too many analogous statements or analogous observations towards humans in this class, because human behavior is a beast all its own, which is why we have a psychology department. It's interesting to me when I see people I know and people that I don't know, for that matter, on things like Facebook arguing that, you know, sex is determined at birth and there's males and there's females and that's it. And they're always referring to this in terms of human sex determination. But when they say these things, they make these blanket statements that make it sound like every species on the planet has chromosomal sex determination, and there's never any variance in sex determination, and that's just the way it is. And it indicates the massive, like, chasm of ignorance of people, because there are a wide diversity of sex determination mechanisms out there in the world. And, you know, I remember in grad school, I read a paper where a researcher going through spider specimens in a museum had run across a spider species, one of the Schizocosa species. They found an individual that was a hermaphrodite. And this is in a species that is normally, you know, thought of as being chromosomally sex determined with males and females. But this particular specimen was bilaterally hermaphroditic, in that one half of the body exhibited the sexual characteristics of a male, and the other half of the body exhibited the sexual characteristics of a female. So it was a spider, and it had a head and an abdomen. And on the abdomen, there's a portion, you saw these in the Stratton article, if you guys looked at the Stratton article. On the abdomen, there's an epigyne, and the epigyne was only half there. And then on the other side of the animal, the pedipalps, which is where the male copulatory organs are, one pedipalp was a normal female pedipalp, but the other pedipalp had a male intromittent organ on it. Totally bizarre thing. It was worth a little note in the Journal of Arachnology, and you can look it up and can see pictures of this unusual spider. So I'm always just astounded at people's ignorance of the diversity of ways of going about getting things done in the natural world. So, chromosomal sex determination. Lots of organisms do it, and when they do it, they do it in different ways. So, for example, in males, the sex chromosomes are the X and Y chromosome, and the males are the ones that have the dimorphic chromosome genotype. Birds are ZW. They give them different letter designations because it's also a different form of sex determination. In this case, the females are the ones that have different sex chromosomes. We've talked about haplodiploidy in the social insects, and this is a situation where you're female if you are diploid, whereas you are male if you are haploid. And that's a diploid or haploid entire genome, not just a single chromosome type. In birds and mammals, there's a single chromosome type. In humans, it's chromosome 23, which is the sex chromosomes. Those can be either XX or XY. In birds, it's a single chromosome as well. In social insects, it is the entire genome that either has 2 copies of every chromosome or simply 1 copy of every chromosome. So chromosomal sex determination is relatively straightforward. In most cases, there are genes that occur on the Y chromosome that do not occur on the X chromosome. Oftentimes, these genes affect things like hormonal production, which ultimately ends up influencing whatever the sex is of the individual carrying those chromosomes. Environmental sex determination is different and unusual and a little bit hard to wrap your brain around in terms of how this could have evolved. So for many lizards and crocodiles, what happens is that this is the ratio of males to, this is the fraction of the population that is male versus the total fraction. So your textbook always expresses ratios, sex ratios as percent male. What percentage of the population is male? And they could have done what percentage is female, but they didn't. So basically, the male percentage of the whole population. So 0.5 on these graphs would indicate a 50-50 mix. As you move towards 1, you're getting more and more male biased, and as you move towards 0, you're getting more and more female biased. So in lizards and many crocodiles, if you are incubated as an egg at low temperatures, you end up being female, and as temperature increases, you get more and more male biased sex ratios. In some species, this is a very sharp threshold model. In other species, it's much more gradual. For most turtles, it's just the opposite. Low temperatures produce males, high temperatures produce females. The snapping turtle, which is actually Calydra serpentina, I just saw a snapping turtle on Sunday while I was out road cruising for roadkill. Snapping turtles are unusual among turtles in that both really low temperatures and high temperatures produce female bias sex ratios, and intermediate temperatures produce male sex ratios. This is interesting because a lot of the work that has been done on temperature-dependent sex determination has been done on snapping turtles, and strangely enough, it's one of the harder groups to work on because you have to hit this sweet spot in the middle of the temperature range in order for you to get a male bias sex ratio. And the way this operates is that there are some genes that are activated by temperature. And these genes are activated by temperature. In many cases, it has to happen during a certain narrow time period during development. And when those genes are activated, it essentially controls hormonal production such that then those hormones determine whether you develop into a male individual or a female individual. So those are the two big areas of sex determining mechanisms. And when we think about the evolution of sex ratios, R.A. Fisher put out this idea, this theory of equal investment. And the idea is that whenever you start getting sex ratios that begin to get skewed, so let's say if one male can fertilize 20 females, why not have a 1:20 ratio of one male to 20 females? This would ultimately maximize population growth. But of course, the goal of any individual in mating isn't to maximize population growth, it's to maximize individual fitness, individual reproductive output. So this idea would be a kind of group selectionist sort of way of thinking about things. In reality, though, what happens is as one sex becomes more and more rare, it becomes more and more valuable. And so what is the sex ratio of the population? How much does a particular sex require to produce? Assuming that it takes the same amount of energy to produce a male offspring as it does a female offspring, you would expect there to be, on average, a 50-50 ratio. So imagine that you have a population that is made up of mostly females, and you have one male. If this male cannot reproduce with all of these females, then some of those females will not get to reproduce because there's only one male to service them all. And so if this male hooks up with this female and they produce two offspring, and one of those offspring is a female and the other one is a male, now you have all these females with two males. Well, now these two males, there's only one more female, but there's two males. And at some point, there are going to be enough males in the population to service all of the females. And at that point, you can stop producing males. But up until that point, it behooves this female to produce more males than females because those males have a greater opportunity to have sex with lots of females. And we already know that because of investment in sperm and egg, that males maximize their fitness by mating with lots of females. This is the classic scenario for one male to actually produce lots of offspring if he finds himself in a female biased sex ratio. Man, I'm looking out my window and it is really storming out there. The trees outside my window are going nuts. I've not heard of any severe storm warning or anything. How many of you guys are here in the Kansas City area?
I'm not, but it's very much storming here. I put my car away because of the hail.
Okay, yeah.
I'm in Kansas City, just north of the river, and it's starting to clear up a little bit now. It's
Oh,
not
is it?
raining
Okay.
outside anymore.
Yeah, it's really, I'm not going to be surprised if there aren't some downed trees and stuff before it's all said and done. So as long as you have a skewed sex ratio towards females, you're going to have males being more valuable because they will have more opportunities to mate with multiple females. Females are restricted oftentimes in the number of offspring that they can have, as we've discussed ad nauseum in this class, it seems. So one of the things that you can do to explore this is to actually experimentally manipulate sex ratio. And as it turns out, organisms, there is a genetic basis for sex ratio production. And as it turns out is if you move a population away from a particular even mix of males and females, the population over time begins to converge on a 50-50 mix of sex ratios. And this is seen in these little guppy-like fish. When the sex ratio is perturbed away from a 50-50 mix, over a couple of generations, the population reconverges. And so evolution over time very quickly compensates for unequal sex ratios. And what's happening is if any individual has a gene that causes them to produce more of one sex than the other sex. If that gene has you producing more of one sex than the other sex in the right direction, that gene will move through the population relatively quickly. So there's fluctuation around the 50-50 mark until the population finally settles down. So sex ratios become important when individuals are competing for resources. So think of an environment where a male and a female mate, and then their offspring hang around in the same territory for a time period after they are born, or after they hatch, or even after they have grown up. If there is a lot of resource competition going on, if you have, once again, in this case, this is an even sex ratio, if the females compete with one another for resources, once again, because generally females invest more in reproduction than males do, they are going to have highest fitness when they can reduce the competition for resources among their siblings, and the males will then, you will have a situation where there is a male-biased sex ratio that is best for the females in this particular population. So it produces less local resource competition. If, on the other hand, females interact with one another in a way that their interactions free up resources or produce more resources, you might see a situation where females enhance the amount of resources that are available locally. And in those cases, you would expect the population to move towards a female-biased sex ratio. So imagine some of the systems that we've looked at in the past where females share parental care for the offspring of other females. In this case, what you're basically allowing is you're allowing more resources as females cooperatively care for offspring. This is the type of situation that should drive a female-biased sex ratio. So whether more females results in more competition or more females results in less competition, that's what will determine what the outcome is in terms of the observed sex ratio in the end. So when relatives interact, if females are limited, you might see a female-biased sex ratio being favored. Any individual that can produce more females than males, going to produce them into this limited female environment. That makes females a limited resource. They're going to have higher reproductive success because all of the males will be wanting to mate with them. If males can breed with their sisters, males become more valuable. And there's a ratio in your book that basically says if n number of females lay eggs, mating then occurs between these offspring and females only disperse, then the sex ratio that you should expect is a function of the number of females that are laying eggs. So you can actually put this into a spreadsheet and simulate this, where you essentially have sex ratio over as a function of female size. So this is female population size versus sex ratio, and it very quickly converges on a 50-50 mixture. And when you look at one of the examples that is in your book, you see these parasitic wasps that tend to lay eggs in the pupae of insects. So this is a moth pupa, if I recall correctly. Well, what happens is any moth comes to one of these pupae, and she can detect whether or not this pupae has been colonized, has been parasitized prior to her arriving. So she may be the first female, she may be the third or fourth or 15th female to lay her eggs inside of this cocoon. Individuals that are the first ones to get there, you will see that they produce a very female-biased sex ratio because there are no other eggs in this. But as the number of individuals come to this cocoon, you have more and more females founding this thing. Essentially, that ratio begins to converge on a 50-50 mixture, which is exactly what Fisher's hypothesis would basically say. As the number of females in a population increases, the sex ratio should converge on a 50-50 mixture of the two sexes. In the case of social interactions enhancing resources, the Seychelles warbler is an interesting case in that oftentimes they will hatch out a pair of offspring, and then those offspring will stick around and help at the nest. And so this is, again, another experiment where you have differences in territory quality on the x-axis from low to medium to high. And generally, the lower the quality of the habitat, once again, the more males you tend to have. As territory quality improves, i.e. you have more resources available, that sex ratio bias shifts to a female bias sex ratio. And this happens over many, many years. But when you have helpers at the nest, that relationship breaks down. And so low, medium, high was manipulated by the researchers. And what constitutes low, medium, high varies from year to year, depending on food availability. But what they did in the high situation is they actually supplemented food. And when they supplemented food, it skewed the sex ratio. But in those nests that had helpers, you see that differences in territory quality didn't actually make much of a difference, because having helpers at the nest tends to improve the resources that are available. And as a result, wait a minute, am I getting this right? Am I interpreting this right? Look, I don't have the caption on this for some reason. I reviewed this over the weekend and haven't looked at it again. It's an increase in the number of helpers. So this is when you have less than one helper. When you have less than one helper, you lower resource competition and you get the advantages of enhancement. When you have more than two or more helpers, those individuals start to compete for resources, and as a result, you will tend to go back to producing a male bias sex ratio, because you are now experiencing local resource competition, not local resource enhancement. That's why when you have too many helpers on a site, that even in a high quality territory, they begin to bring about competition for resources. And that's why there's a shift towards producing more sons. So, sex allocation in variable environments. This goes back to Trivers, which we've already talked about Trivers a couple of times. 3 assumptions. Basically, if you are a female in better condition, meaning you have more resources, Therefore, you can produce better quality offspring. Higher quality offspring become higher quality adults, and sons gain a greater fitness benefit from being of high quality rather than females gaining from greater fitness. And so we can ask, when is a son gaining a fitness benefit as a result of being high quality? We've talked about some of these things in the past. What are some ideas you have?
I have a question first.
What's that?
I have a question first.
Yeah.
So I thought that it was when females had, better conditions, they were going to produce more females.
So this is now dealing with variability of the environment. So this is an addendum to things that we've talked about so far. So environmental quality can be just the total amount, can also be things like the consistency of that environment rather than just it having a lot of whatever resources are available. So yes, generally we expect that under good conditions, under good conditions, there's less resource competition, so you should see sex ratios converging on a 50-50 mix. If resources are limited, such that there's competition among females for resources, you should expect a male bias sex ratio. If the females add to resource availability in some way, i.e. they cooperatively hunt, or they share parental care duties or something like that, then you should expect a female bias sex ratio.
But like with the warblers, when territory quality was high, then the ratio was female bias.
Yes, because you have the benefits of no resource competition. So having a high quality resource, you reduce local resource competition, which basically makes it behave as if there's local resource enhancement. So you have more resources to go around. Oftentimes, reproduction is limited by male access to eggs. And as a result of that, you would have these two males servicing all of these individuals. And these individuals are these male siblings. So this is a situation where relatives are interacting with one another, not just anybody in the population. So low quality territories, you tend to have male biased sex ratios. High quality territories, you tend to have female biased sex ratios because local resource competition is not involved. I feel like I've lost you.
I feel like it's just because we've talked about like so many scenarios so quickly that now I'm just like confused about the variables at play.
Okay. What would you be confusing them with?
Like I'm trying to come up with
this with.
I'm trying to come up with like a table or a formula in my mind where I think like if X is the case, then Y is the case, but then I get confused because I don't know if that's the way it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there are different forms of competition. So let me see if I can maybe help you find your way through the forest. So what among the kinds of competition that we've talked about is male-male competition. This is a situation when males are competing with one another, and in this case, the resource that they're competing for is actual females. Okay, so when I use the term competition, you can use it in terms of competition, thinking about a wide variety of resources. So it's always useful to identify what the resource is that's being competed for. Whenever we have male-male competition, like we talked about back in the sexual selection chapter and in the chapter dealing with mating systems, The limiting resource in this case is females, but that's only one type of resource. The resource that we're talking about here could be something like food, nesting sites, anything that the female would find useful for successful reproduction. In this case, females are competing with other females. And in this case, if the resources that you need for reproduction are in limiting supply, individuals that produce fewer offspring will actually have offspring that have higher success because you're producing sisters that are not, you're producing daughters who are not competing with their sisters for access to these resources. So I think that's another crucial situation in this scenario. These are females that are all related to one another. And so this is local resource competition when you have families that hang around in the same area. So imagine a classic example of this is Florida scrub jays. Florida scrub jays, males and females will produce a clutch of eggs. Those eggs will hatch. Those offspring, rather than going off and founding their own nest that first year, will actually stay with the parents and care for the next brood of young that come along. And one of the reasons for this is that oftentimes in the first couple or 3 years of adult life in Florida scrub jays, they are not very good at reproducing. They suffer high nest failure, such that they can improve their overall fitness by staying and helping their siblings survive rather than going off and reproducing on their own. In any of these situations where your offspring tend to hang around in the same neighborhood as you, you have to think about how you, the biological researcher, have to think about how are those offspring that hang around in the same area, how are they going to affect resources? If, when you produce offspring, a male and a female mate, they produce some offspring. If males can mate with their sisters and the sisters are hanging around, these sisters have plenty of access to males because the males are just right there. But if the resources that are available to the females for reproduction are in limiting supply, you should expect a parent to reduce the number of females that are produced to reduce competition among her siblings. If having a bunch of siblings hanging around leads to something like improved parental care, cooperative foraging, cooperative hunting, something like this, such that resources are gained as a result of these sisters cooperating with one another, there are more resources made available, in which case any individual who produces more daughters is going to have higher fitness because of the increased reproductive output of those daughters. The reason that this works is that in this case, these two male brothers can mate with all of these sisters. In this case, only one or two of these males is going to be able to mate with these sisters, which means that you're wasting your gametes producing males because they only have access to a limited number of females, and but so they're not going to be reproducing, but these two females are going to basically be sharing a pool of resources that is divided among the two of them rather than among all five of them. This also assumes that it's the females that stick around and help and not the males with parental care and things like this. So when you look at your book and they're talking about the Seychelles warbler example, if I recall correctly. So the description from your textbook on the Seychelles warbler is breeding pairs remain together on the same territory for up to 9 years, producing one offspring a year, with female offspring staying behind on their natal territory to help through a range of behaviors, including territory defense, nest building, incubation, and feeding of young. And so in this case, when they do have male offspring, those male offspring disperse. So in this case, females stay around and help males disperse. And in the process of those females staying around, those females assist the parents with the protection of future broods. And so this is a system analogous to the Florida scrub jay system. On high quality territories where there is a high density of insect prey, having a helper is advantageous. In contrast, on low quality territories where there's low density of insect prey, the increased competition for food means having a helper is disadvantageous. And in this case, because females are the ones that stay around, having more females around actually is disadvantageous because of local resource competition. In this case, the female offspring staying around to help is actually hindering because there's now one more mouth to feed in a situation that is already limited in food availability, which is why that you see, once again, male bias sex ratios at low quality territories, because those males are ultimately all going to disperse away, reducing the number of birds in your territory, making more food available for the offspring that is due to come. That trend from low quality to high quality, leading to a shift in sex ratio, holds up until you start getting too many helpers on the territory, which then increases local resource competition. When you have more local resource competition, you're going to then shift back towards a male biased sex ratio. So it depends partly on who's competing, whether or not you're related, and what you're competing for. So as you try and think through any given example that is presented to you, ask yourself, what's being competed for, who's doing the competing, are the competing individuals related or not? And that will help you, I think, walk through, okay, well, what's going to be the outcome here? Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, I think that somewhat clarified it. Now let's go on to the next idea and see if I can put that in there.
Okay, all right. So variable environments. Body condition of a female is generally going to be better for producing better quality offspring. The higher quality offspring become higher quality of adults. This is better for being male than being female. Why is male quality something that a parent would be concerned about? What is it about male quality that matters? Thinking back on the last 3 or 4 chapters that we've been working with. When does male quality matter?
When they're trying to attract a mate and like boost their reproductive success.
Okay, so if you have a sexually dimorphic characteristic, a characteristic that expresses itself in males and not in females, and that is accessible by females, and that badge or whatever it is that you carry as a male honestly communicates your quality, females may find that attractive, and as a result, you may get more matings as a result of that. Under what other conditions might male quality matter?
Male competition.
Yeah, male-male competition. If you're a big, gigantic, hulking elephant seal on a beach versus a small, wimpy elephant seal on a beach, that male quality in this case, which is just raw size, is going to help you prevail in territorial contests. And as a result of that quality, you will get, 95% of all of the matings on that particular beachhead. And so, sons gain a greater fitness benefit from being of high quality under these sorts of conditions where the quality of the male is reflected in some sort of sexually dimorphic advertisement that then males choose in terms of deciding who to mate with, or when you have male-male competition resulting in contests over access to female gametes. So the situation in which this has been, that your book illustrates where this has been applied, is with red deer. And so this is how the model works. Basically, if you think about maternal quality from high quality to low quality, the relationship between the mother's quality and the fitness of offspring has two different relationships. It's a linear relationship. It doesn't mean that daughters don't gain anything from maternal quality. As maternal quality increases, the fitness of daughters also increases, but it increases in a linear way. But as maternal quality increases, the gain in fitness for sons occurs at an exponential rate. So there's an exponential rise in quality of sons. And so you would expect at some point that there would be an even sex ratio of sons to daughters at some level of maternal quality. Above that, you should expect sons to be higher fitness, and as a result, you would expect there to be a male-dominated sex ratio, and below that level, you would expect daughters to predominate and there to be a female bias sex ratio. And so this is offspring fitness, not parental fitness. And so what we see when we look at offspring lifetime reproductive success, and you've looked at dominance in red deer herds. So this is a European species of deer. Males are characterized by having these large racks. That's one of the reasons that they're kind of a famous example. It's clearly a sexually selected species. But there are dominance hierarchies in the herds. So these guys are kind of like elk in that you generally have a herd of females that is overseen by one or a few males. And within the females, there is a dominance hierarchy such that there are higher ranking females and lower ranking females. And if you follow herds of red deer, you can figure out who the dominant females are and who the subordinate females are. The most dominant female is presumably dominance is a surrogate for female quality. And as we can see here, as you move up the scale of female dominance, you tend to have individuals that are producing producing sons that have higher fitness. Lower quality females produce sons with lower fitness, but the light blue line is the female, the daughter line for lifetime reproductive success, and maternal quality doesn't affect female quality at all. And so this basically fits approximately the Trivers and Willard model, where maternal success influences the lifetime reproductive success of sons, higher quality, higher fitness, lower quality, lower fitness, but that ends up not being true for females, the female offspring. This then influences sex ratio. Individuals in a herd of red deer that are of high quality should be producing more male offspring and female offspring because of these enhanced benefits to the fitness of their offspring, whereas low quality females should be producing predominantly female offspring. If everybody in the herd is behaving this way, what you would probably see is a sex ratio across the entire herd that converges on an even sex ratio, even though individual males or individual females may be producing biased sex ratios within an individual. Mate attractiveness also matters. So as you are evaluating a mate, in the case of birds, oftentimes it's the vibrancy or presence of certain colors in the plumage of the birds. And as you look at variation in bird coloration, once again, as a measure of attractiveness, and this is in this case the environmental variable, you basically see that the sex ratio alters. As you get more and more attractive male mates, the proportion of males that gets produced by females goes up over time. Obviously, if you're mating with an attractive male mate, you're going to produce offspring that have that attractive male trait in them also. And so it behooves you over evolutionary time to produce males. If you are mating with low attractive mates, male quality, male attractiveness is low, and so you would have higher fitness if you're producing predominantly daughters, because the daughters would not be expressing these same attractiveness traits. So this is in species that have chromosomal sex determination. And in this case, what's happening over time is there's genetic variation for sex ratio, and that genetic variation for sex ratio will then be acted on by selection to determine what the sex ratio that is being produced at any given moment in evolutionary time. But over evolutionary time, you should see these things converging at approximately a 50-50 ratio, holding all other things equal. Environmental sex determination is very different in that sex ratios may fluctuate widely from year to year, having nothing to do with what the current operational sex ratio is in a population. So this was first talked about back in the 1970s by a guy named Eric Charnoff and J.J. Bull. I forget where Charnoff was at the time, but Bull has been at the University of Texas at Austin his entire adult career, if I recall. So they looked at environmental sex determination. They've looked at environmental sex determination in a wide variety of different organisms, but Bull has done a lot of work with reptiles in particular and turtles specifically. So ESD is simply a situation where environment is the, and I don't know why, I thought I had already fixed that, individual. The environment in which an individual develops has different fitness consequences for males and females. So there's a figure here. This is the snapping turtle situation. This is just the figure from earlier. At cool temperatures, you produce clutches of eggs with female sex ratio bias. At intermediate temperatures, you have male bias sex ratios, and at high temperatures, you have female bias sex ratios. In order for this system to operate, there needs to be a correlation between temperature, the sex of the individual, and fitness, such that males produced at intermediate temperatures have to have higher fitness than males produced at slightly cooler temperatures or slightly warmer temperatures. And females produced at cool temperatures or warm temperatures have to have higher fitness than individuals produced at slightly cooler on this end, or sorry, slightly warmer on this end, or slightly cooler on this end. So if you're produced from a 50-50 sex ratio clutch at a temperature of 20 degrees, both males and females in that clutch have to have lower fitness than if they were produced in pure clutches at cooler temperatures of females or pure clutches of males produced at these kind of intermediate temperatures. And this is the thing that has vexed people studying this system for literally decades, is establishing the relationship between incubation temperature, sex ratio of the clutch, and fitness of the individuals. And it has vexed people to the point of insanity in some cases. So this idea, this is a figure that I made up to supplement what's in your book. If you have an incubation temperature of 16 degrees centigrade, let's go back. This must have been a different turtle species that I did this for. In this situation, if at 16 degrees male fitness is high, you should have predominantly males being produced at 16 degrees. As you move up the temperature scale, you get more and more females being produced, and as a result, you have higher and higher fitness, which is what is driving that skewed sex ratio. So warm females have higher fitness, intermediate females have somewhat lower fitness, but males have really low fitness. At intermediate, kind of low temperatures, male fitness is higher and female fitness is lower, and at lowest temperatures you have male fitness. What you should see over this range of temperatures is, due to this fitness landscape across temperatures, you should see ratios of the sex ratio of any given clutch being skewed from male-dominated sex ratios to female-dominated sex ratios at cool and warm temperatures. This would correspond more to the case of situations like these turtles here, where males are produced at cold temperatures, females are produced at warm temperatures. These females produced at these warm temperatures should have higher fitness than females produced here in the middle. Males produced at these cold temperatures should have higher fitness than males produced at these intermediate temperatures. If that's not true, then there's no way in which environmental sex determination, temperature-dependent sex determination in particular, could possibly evolve. And like I said, one of the more difficult things in biology is establishing this link between male and female fitness produced at different temperatures. I had a classmate in graduate school who was attempting to do this with snapping turtles. And this is where I became familiar with this area of research. Being able to raise eggs in the lab, incubate eggs in the lab, such that you get this 50-50 mixture of males and females is actually very, very difficult to do. And as a result, he had a lot of problems writing a dissertation simply because of the technological challenge of producing these intermediate sort of sex ratios. Really easy to produce all male clutches, really easy to produce all female clutches, very difficult to hit the midpoints. And then once you've hatched those eggs out into little baby turtles, you then have to do something in order to quantify fitness of those individuals. Now, let's go back. When we think of environmental sex determination, there is a lot of talk about things like global warming. What are the consequences for these species that have temperature-dependent sex determination? What are the consequences of a warming environment?
You're going to start to end up with only females or only males.
Yeah, if the environment that you live in is warming substantially over time, and if this warming climate is happening over relatively short periods of evolutionary time, if you are laying your eggs in a place that is getting warmer and warmer, you will tend to have very biased sex ratios in each clutch. But because everybody is experiencing the same environmental temperatures, everybody's clutches are biased towards either males or females. And this is a problem for turtles in particular. Why?
Because they're really slow and they can't move to colder places.
Okay, so generally most turtles just migrate from their pond or river in which they live to egg-laying sites on land, and then they go back to the water. So we generally don't see most turtles making long overland migrations, but it's not because they're not physically capable of it. It's just that they just don't for whatever reason. They have everything they need where they're living. Someone else give it a shot.
I mean, is it just because like that temperature change is and the change between males and females is so dramatic?
Well, no, because if they had ways of kind of coping with this or responding to this evolutionarily, they might be able to just evolve their way out of this. The evolution might track environmental change. Why can they not track environmental change very well?
They leave the eggs after they lay them?
They do leave the eggs, which is why environmental sex determination kind of works, depending on where you leave them. Some clutches, if it's a clutch that is out in the sun, it'll be warmer. If you laid your clutch of eggs in the cool shade, it'll be cooler. And over time, you kind of converge once again on this 50-50 sex ratio. But that's not what I'm looking for either. What else do you know about turtles other than that they are, according to parables, amazingly slow?
Turtles lay eggs at the same place that they hatched, so they always go back to the same habitat.
Certainly, but that's general habitat, but within that habitat you might have all sorts of small microclimatic differences going on that once again generally will lead to a balanced sex ratio. What else do you know about turtles? So that's true, it just doesn't affect sex ratio necessarily. It might, but it generally doesn't.
Does it have to do with like the number of offspring or the frequency at which they produce offspring?
So from life histories, one of the things that we do know is that in many cases, turtles have many eggs. But what happens to most of those offspring?
I'm gonna guess they
There's no-
don't all make it.
What?
Do they not all make it?
Yeah. A few of them reach adulthood, reach sexual maturity. Why? It's a combination of factors. What are a couple of them that are probably important?
Do predators eat the eggs?
So in many cases, there's egg predation, nest predation. Other things. You're getting a little crash course in turtle natural history, turtle life history. So nest predation gets rid of many of these eggs. Once the eggs hatch, what happens to the babies?
Don't they have to make it to the water? Like they have-
So you're thinking of sea turtles, but certainly aquatic turtles need to make it to the water. What happens as a little turtle is running across the land to make it to a pond or to the seashore or whatever?
It gets eaten.
Yep, high predation on young. Once they make it to the water, what do they have to do? What's another characteristic of turtles and tortoises in general, from a life history perspective? Think of Lonesome George. You guys remember Lonesome George from your first year? Anybody? I know it's a long time ago. I get that. Look up Lonesome George. Lonesome George. Lonesome George. A male Pinta Island tortoise, the last known individual of his species. In his last years, he was known as the rarest creature in the world. Da, 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 da. How old was he?
Very old.
He's aged 101 to 102. So turtles in general, what happens to them in terms of their lifespan?
If they make it to adulthood, they live a long time.
If you escape nest predation and if you escape early predation when you're young, you finally get to a size where you're kind of immune to predation. And so they are really long-lived. Long-lived organisms, what do you know about the age at first reproduction of long-lived organisms?
They're old.
It takes a long time in a long-lived organism to reach sexual maturity. So there are some turtle species here in the United States that will not reproduce until they're around 35 years old. So imagine that you're a turtle species. It takes you 35 years to reach sexual maturity. You were hatched into a world 35 years ago that may be very differently thermally than the environment that you're going to be doing your first reproduction in. So there's this time lag in the ability of evolutionary to respond to climate change if climate change is happening very rapidly. And so one of the things that concerns turtle biologists on a regular basis is that this curve, these curves that you see in this figure right here, are kind of evolutionarily determined, but they're evolutionarily determined in a group of slow-growing, late-to-mature, long-lived species with low reproductive rates. And what all those things life history-wise means is that these are organisms that are slow to respond evolutionarily to change. Now, if the thermal environment that you live in is changing at a pace that is too fast for your evolutionary response to selection to cope with, you may find yourself 35 years from now producing eggs into an environment that you aren't evolutionarily equipped to handle, because you're going to have a temperature-dependent sex determination that leads you to laying clutches of eggs that are destined to all have nothing but females. And then once you have a generation of turtles where there's all females and no males,
No more babies.
you have no more babies. And so unless you have a life history that allows for relatively quick evolutionary change, you're going to find the environment changing too quickly under your feet, and you don't have any mechanisms evolutionarily to kind of cope with that level of change.
So it all comes back to turtles being slow.
This is slow in a different way, yes, slow in a different way. You were thinking of tortoise and hare slow. I was thinking of rates of evolutionary change slow. All right, we will talk to Alexis on Wednesday about the Prohl and Hodel paper. And then on Friday, we will finish up sex allocation, because all we have left is sex change, sex-changing organisms, and that will constitute the semester for us. Questions?
Do you want us to just email you the lit sum, or did you put
Yep.
a place to turn it in?
No, same as last time.
Okay.
All right, I will see you then on Wednesday.
All right. Bye forever.
All right, see ya.